It's 6 p.m. in Paris here. Hello again, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight for a lot of us, especially our special guest and speaker. So tonight for this session of DEM'ARTS seminar series, Creation, Democracy, and Digital Media, it's a huge pleasure for us to have Professor Lev Manovich with us, and we are especially grateful as it's also currently 2 a.m. for him in Korea. So although he don't need any introduction, but please allow me to briefly highlight his contribution. Bienvenue à toutes et à tous. Merci de vous joindre à nous pour cette séance de cycle de séminaire DEM'ARTS, Création, démocratie et numérique de l'Université Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne. C'est un immense plaisir d'accueillir aujourd'hui professeur Lev Manovich parmi nous. Et nous tenons à le remercier, d'autant plus qu'il est actuellement 2 heures du matin pour lui en Corée. Et même si ce n'est pas nécessaire de le présenter, permettez-moi de rappeler brièvement ses contributions. He's an artist, writer, and one of the most influential theorists of digital art and culture in the world. He is a presidential professor of computer science at the City University of New York Graduate Center and the director of the Cultural Analytic Lab. After studying painting, architecture, and filmmaking, Manovich began using computers to create digital art in 1984. He has played a key role in creating 4 new cultural analytics from 2007, AI aesthetics in 2017, and more on. Manovich was first conceptually examined the fundamental components of digital culture, such as artificial aesthetics, cultural analytics, Instagram, and contemporary image software, take command, and the language of new media, which has been called the most provocative and comprehensive media history since Marshall McLuhan. His digital art projects have been exhibited in 14 solos and 142 international group exhibitions, and many of prestigious institutions such as Institute of Contemporary Art in London, Centre Pompidou, the Shanghai Biennale, and ZKM. So let's go in French. Lev Manovich est un artiste, auteur et l'un des théoriciens les plus influents de l'art et de la culture numérique du monde. Et il est professeur d'informatique de Graduate Center de la City University of New York et le directeur de Cultural Analytic Labs. Après avoir étudié la peinture, l'architecture et la réalisation cinématographique, Manovich a commencé à utiliser l'ordinateur pour ses créations en art contemporain dès 1984. Il a joué un rôle clé dans l'émergence de 4 nouveaux domaines de recherche: les nouveaux médias et la culture numérique à partir de 1991, les études de logiciels à partir de 2001, l'analyse culturelle à partir de 2007, l'esthétique de l'IA 2017. Manovich a été le premier à examiner conceptuellement les éléments fondamentaux de culture numérique tels que l'interface, la base des données, la réalité augmentée, le réalisme esthétique et bien d'autres. Il a publié 195 articles réédités dans plus de 800 fois dans 37 langues, ainsi que 17 ouvrages, parmi lesquels Artificial Aesthetics, Cultural Analytics, Instagram and Contemporary Image, Software Takes Command, The Language of New Media, qualifié d'histoire des médias la plus provocante et la plus importante et complète depuis Marshall McLuhan. Ces œuvres numériques, artistiques, ont été l'objet aussi de 14 expositions personnelles et 142 expositions collectives internationales dans les institutions prestigieuses telles que l'Institut d'art contemporain à Londres, au Centre Pompidou, la Biennale de Shanghai, ZKM, entre autres. So before starting, two quick points. We will keep some time at the end of the session to answer your questions. So don't hesitate to get in at that point. And the second one is those who find it helpful, they can active a live automated text transcription of the seminar via Zoom menu on the bottom of your screen. Avant de commencer, deux précisions. Juste, nous gardons le temps à la fin pour la séance, à la fin de la séance pour répondre à vos questions et échanger. Donc, n'hésitez pas à intervenir à ce moment-là. Et le second point, c'est que pour celles et ceux qui sont intéressés, il est possible d'activer une transcription de texte en direct de séminaire via le menu en bas de votre écran de Zoom à droite. C'est situé vers la droite. Yeah, thank you for your patience. So the floor is yours, Lev Manovich. Thank you so much.
Good evening, dear friends. So listening to my bio in French, written by a postdoc, Azadeh, from Sorbonne, I think life doesn't get better. Maybe having some glass of Armagnac in my hand would make it even perfect. But as you mentioned, originally, when I agreed to the seminar, I thought I was going to be closer in time zone to Paris. I was supposed to be participating in a kind of festival exhibition in Armenia, but as things worked out, I decided not to do the trip. So here I am in Korea, where I've been residing since kind of COVID started, and doing all my classes for my university in New York on Zoom. So it's like perfect situation. Because America, right? It's kind of like big and strange and not always functional. And Korea is very modern and harmonious and etc. The only problem is with the time zone. So it's 6 p.m. in France, and it is 2 a.m. in Korea. So what's going to happen, I have no idea. I did spend most of today preparing, and I kind of worked out a plan. So there are multiple acts, right? There's going to be a short theory section, which corresponds to a kind of theoretical and historical perspective on generative AI, as announced in the poster. But I don't want to kind of bore you or torture you with purely theoretical presentation for a long time. And then hopefully, if I keep the time right, there's going to be two kind of other acts where I would reveal myself as a practitioner, as an artist and designer. And the whole idea is to not to make some kind of definite and final, and correct, right, statement about what generative AI is, what kind of media it is, how is it different or similar to other types of synthetic images, such as 3D computer graphics or photography, etc., etc. But rather to, I think, that's what kind of thinkers should try to do, is to kind of multiply the perspectives, right? Multiply possible viewpoints and kind of give you, a number of possible ways to think about this new media, and also a number of ways of kind of connecting it to the history of culture, the history of art, design, cinema, architecture, and so on, right? And in my work on and with digital media, I seem to always do that, right? So usually when this new kind of aspect of digital culture appears, I seem to write some articles, or maybe eventually a book. And I also usually do one or more art projects which kind of seem to interrogate the same phenomena. And this is, in fact, what happened this time. So in the summer of 2022, suddenly I became aware of very rapid emergence and progress, right, in generative image tools, specifically, the leading tool, which still people think is the best, Midjourney, became available kind of publicly in, I think, July of 2022. So I spent, next 2 years almost every day using this tool, creating tens of thousands of images, eventually having 2 kind of personal exhibitions. And as I was kind of creating these artworks, thinking about what I'm doing, I also was publishing lots of small notes, lots of provocations on social media, and eventually it became a book. So let me just see which one, just a moment. I think we want to do, okay, this one I want to share, and we'll use this mode. So I just realized today that there is this multiple modes which you can use Zoom. So maybe I can use this mode where you tell me if it's working, right? So I kind of don't disappear into the corner, don't become a small puppet, but actually you can see my face. Okay. So this is the book. It's now being translated into Spanish and simplified Chinese. So I don't have a publisher in English yet. So maybe, at some point in the future, if I get an English publisher, I would have to take, this website down. But for now, it's here, and you can download the whole thing, from my website, manovich.net. And in fact, the book is a collaboration with my co-author, Emanuel Ariely, who is a professor of aesthetics in Venice. He lives in Berlin. And me and him kind of started, talking about the issue of AI aesthetics, and approaching it from different perspectives. I mean, he's an expert in kind of philosophy and psychology of art. And I convinced him to keep publishing, to publish the whole thing online so we can participate in the kind of ongoing conversation. So the first chapter was published, you can see, in end of 2021, and then the second was published a bit later in January 22, and then the third one was in March 22, and then we just kind of, continued, and finally we finished everything with September. I mean, both me and him continue writing. I mean, if I want, I can add like 10 more chapters right away, but I want to keep it, shorter. It's easy to translate. And what I'll present in the first part of today will be based on chapter 5. So you can, if you're interested, you can download it and read it and find it here. Okay. So let me finish this part. Okay. So this first part is going to be maybe a bit unusual. Let me just stop sharing because I think I have to do it one more time. Okay, let option. Okay, share sound. Okay, let me try to do it one more time. Okay, just a moment, like this. Perfect. This August, I made a short video, which in fact presents this theoretical argument, which is announced in this lecture. But as I said, it will only be one part of my presentation. And in this video, I have help from AI to make my point. So I'll play a video. It's only 8 minutes. And then I will continue discussing these ideas myself, so you can also compare, AI performance and my human performance. Let's try.
Just,
Share
just,
this.
just
Yeah.
one point, please.
Yes.
We can see your screen is side by side by your picture. So
Yes, it's on purpose.
it's a purpose. Okay, okay.
I selected this option on purpose.
Okay, okay.
Yes,
Sorry.
I just explained it. Yes. Okay. So let me know if you can hear the sound. Okay.
Together with my AI colleague, we will deliver this lecture written by Lev Manovich. The lecture title is Make It New,
You can hear, right?
Yes.
You can hear the sound?
Perfect.
Generative
Okay.
AI, Modernism, and Digital Art. I'll begin by summarizing the main ideas of this presentation. We will discuss important parallels between media and art creation using generative AI today, and a number of conceptually related artistic paradigms in the 20th century. Although generative AI media and modernist art seem to be at odds with one another, one relies on making it new, while the other uses training data from previously created works of art, they actually have one important thing in common, in my opinion. While modernist artists explicitly opposed traditions, in reality, they achieved innovation by reinterpreting and incorporating older art forms from other cultures. Similarly, generative AI tools allow the creation of new works because they are trained on massive databases of existing art and media. Therefore, making new art and media with generative AI fits into a long-standing tradition in modern art that involves creating new art from accumulations of existing artifacts. This tradition encompasses modernist collage and photomontage, postmodern bricolage, net art, and the pioneering media work of artists like Nam June Paik. This tradition is further developed by certain contemporary artists who work with artificial intelligence, such as Lev Peryolkov and Rafik Anadol. They train AI models on specific datasets to produce novel artworks that engage in a dialogue with historical art while introducing new possibilities. Unsupervised by Rafik Anadol Studio is one such artwork. The project uses AI model trained on the image dataset of tens of thousands of artworks from the collection of the Museum of Modern Art, New York. MoMA collection, in my opinion, is one of the best representations of the most creative and experimental period in human visual history. 100 years of modern art between 1870 and 1970. It captures modernist artists' feverish and relentless experiments to create new visual and communication languages and make it new.
We have summarized the key ideas of this talk. Now we will go over these ideas more slowly, adding additional information. On the surface, the logic of modernism appears to be diametrically opposed to the process of training generative AI. Modernist artists wanted to depart from classical art and its defining characteristics, such as visual symmetry, hierarchical compositions, and narrative content. The new modern art was founded on a fundamental rejection of everything that had come before it, at least in theory, as expressed in their manifestos. AI models are trained in the opposite manner, by learning from historical culture and art created up to now. AI model is like an art student studying in the Meta Museum without walls that houses only historical art. But we all know that art theory and art practice are not the same thing. Modern artists did not completely reject the past and everything that came before. Instead, modern art developed by reinterpreting and copying images and forms from much older art traditions, such as Japanese prints, Vincent van Gogh, African sculpture, Pablo Picasso, and Russian icons, Kazimir Malevich. Thus, the artists only rejected the dominant high art paradigms of the time, realism and salon art, but not the rest of human art history. In other words, modernism was deeply historicist. Rather than inventing everything from scratch, it innovated by adapting certain older aesthetics to contemporary art contexts. Generative AI and modernist art are also similar in another way. AI models, indeed, are trained on already existing human art and culture artifacts. However, their newly generated outputs are not mechanical replicas or simulations of what has already been created. In my opinion, these are frequently genuinely new cultural artifacts with previously unseen content, aesthetics, or styles. In other words, I'd like to suggest that modernist art project and generative AI media creation are more similar than it appears on the surface. We already briefly discussed Unsupervised Project by Refik Anadol Studio. Anadol Studio trained a new AI model using a custom historical art dataset, the MoMA collection. We will now look at a project by another artist that fine-tuned a popular existing AI model using a smaller historical art collection. Russian artist Lev Peryolkov fine-tuned the Stable Diffusion Model 2.1 using 40 paintings by well-known nonconformist artists who worked in the USSR starting in the 1960s, Eric Bulatov, Ilya Kabakov, and others. Peryolkov's image series Artificial Experiments 1-10 2023, created with this custom AI model, is an original artwork that captures the aesthetic and semantic worlds of these artists without repeating closely any of their existing works. Instead, their DNAs captured by the model enable production of new meanings and visual concepts.
Let's continue our exploration of the parallels between the generative AI medium and modern art, including media art. All new cultural artifacts produced with generative AI share one key characteristic. What is this characteristic? Unlike traditional drawings, sculptures, and paintings, generative media artifacts are not created from scratch. They are also not the result of capturing some sensory phenomenon, unlike photography, film, video, or sound recordings. Instead, they are built from a large archive of other media artifacts. In other words, Gen AI can be seen as a new type of database art, analyzed by Lev Manovich in his well-known article Database as a Symbolic Form, published in 1998. But in this case, what are the differences between generative AI medium and earlier kinds of database art? An artist working with earlier media technologies, such as photography, film, or video, was selecting items and assembling new work manually, thus controlling every detail. In contrast, an artist using Gen AI tools typically uses an intermediary AI model already trained by a company on a massive media archive that can have billions of items. Thank you for your attention. The content of this lecture is derived from a draft chapter authored by Lev Manovich for the book titled Artificial Aesthetics, Generative AI Art and Visual Media. The book is written jointly by Manovich and Emanuela Ariely, with each author contributing separate chapters. This and all other chapters can be downloaded from the URL on this slide. See you soon again.
Okay. So, okay, so much for the AI avatar. So I created this video in August, spent quite a bit of time. And, this is from, one of the companies which kind of makes this technology available. There are other ways, to create these avatars. This company is called Synthesia, and, they promote their service. It's usable, for companies which need to create training videos to employers, right, or our internal communication. And, looking at it from a distance of a few months, of course, I see some artifacts, right? So AI doesn't pronounce some names and the dates correctly. But I do think that this kind of example, right? One of numerous examples of what synthetic generative AI can do, can be very useful. For example, I can imagine, preparing some lectures in this way. And of course, there's also the possibility to automatically deliver this video in multiple languages. So it definitely can democratize learning. Now, we live in a time when people are very attuned to the kind of politics of representation, right? And who is speaking. When I showed this video at a conference in South Korea, people said, well, great, we really like it, because sometimes, we have difficulty understanding you. You have this Russian accent, but here we actually understood everything very well. And people actually asked me questions based on the content of this video. So I was very happy. And when I showed the same video in a conference in an art school in Germany, where I think, people are like more obsessed with this idea of representation, and nobody asked me anything about the content of my talk, which was disappointing. But I got two very opposing comments, which I think demonstrates why this kind of obsession with politics of representation and who is speaking, can somebody else speak for you, is ultimately defeating. And of course, this obsession with identity, right? Art about identity, theory of identity, is one of the reasons we now have Trump in office, right? Because people in America are retired from this kind of, from this leftist politics, from, woke identity, and so on and so forth, right? Because it's unrealistic. Anyway, it's my comment. You don't have to agree, but this is what we read in media. So this is the example, right? So when I showed this video in Germany, one comment was, Lev, this is very good. You are very progressive. You are very correct. You selected two female avatars, right? So you have two female avatars doing your talk. And the second comment was, no, this is terrible. Why you selected female avatars? Why you selected this beautiful woman? This is very, very, very bad. So the problem, right, with this kind of approach is that you can't win. So whoever it is, so if I select a man, to kind of an avatar man to represent me, it's a problem. And if I represent a woman, it's a problem. If I select white woman, it's a problem. If I select a woman of color, it's a problem. So you can't win. And then eventually you get Trump in office, if you follow this logic. Anyway, so what I want to do now is actually, let me go back to my face. I want to highlight, one key point in this presentation. Let me get this. Here we are. So the title of presentation, right, and part of the argument kind of tries to place generative AI media within the kind of history of art and connects it to the idea of modernism, right? So the argument is that on the surface, generative AI appears to be very conservative. In some ways, it's like 19th century kind of salon art, because generative AI models are trained, right, on the huge databases of what already exists. But if we actually start using it as artists, designers, composers, writers, filmmakers, we do realize that these models are also capable of generating endless new styles, endless new variations. And of course, it depends, right, what you mean by the new, right? How radical is the new which you want to expect? I mean, somebody can argue that after 100 years of modernism, right, of modern art, even another 30 years of digital art, and fractal images and computer graphics images and computer, and data visualization and all kinds of visual innovations, the human possibility to create new images is exhausted, and all you can do is just create kind of variations on what exists. So maybe from that point of view, generative AI is like kind of miniarism, right? it basically comes like after. But for maybe practitioner, for practicing artist, the ability to mix different styles and to introduce endless variations, it can be very, very exciting, right? So the way this particular argument goes, I would just summarize the point in my own voice, right? On the surface, the logic of modernism appears to be diametrically opposed to the process of training generative AI systems, right? Modern artists desire to depart from classical art and its defining characteristics, such as visual symmetry, hierarchical compositions, and narrative content. In other words, on the surface, right, in their manifestos, surrealism, suprematism, the style, Fauvism, right, always different isms, always different movements. Their art was founded, at least in terms of their manifestos, on the fundamental rejection of everything that had come before. And you can say, well, AI models are trained in the opposite manner by learning from historical culture and art created until now. So AI model is analogous from this perspective to a very conservative artist, which is studying in a kind of meta museum without walls that houses art. Of course, the term museum without walls was introduced, right, by famous French thinker and Minister of Culture Lev Manovich in his books in the late 1950s, right? So then I kind of make this conceptual move and I say, well, actually, that's not how things are in reality. So in fact, modern artists didn't completely reject the past and everything that came before them. So all these people who created modern art, and often we were kind of foreigners, right, living in Paris in the late 19th and early 20th century, people, Russian Jews, Poles, Japanese, Van Gogh, who came, from Northern Europe, right? So they created modern art in Paris, kind of, but many of them came, right, from outside. So we have to also remember that. And they, even though we said, they're completely new, right? We completely, want to get rid of the past. Actually, they copied or creatively reinterpreted or appropriated, if you want, historical traditions of our cultures. So, for example, Van Gogh was influenced by Japanese prints, and that's why you have this kind of flatness in his images and thick, black contours. And people like Modigliani, Picasso, and others, in a way, were copying the forms from African sculpture. And Malevich can be connected to the tradition of Russian icons, and so on and so forth. So we can say that modern artists only rejected the dominant high art paradigm of the time, which has become realistic, representational, right? Today we'll say photorealistic art of Salon, but not the rest of human history. In other words, modernism was deeply historicist. Rather than inventing everything from scratch, it innovated by adapting certain older traditions to contemporary art contexts. So now to make a connection to today, we should not be blinded by how AI models are trained. Yes, AI models are trained on previously created human art and culture artifacts, but their newly generated outputs are not mechanical replicas or simulations what already been created, right? In my opinion, they are frequently genuinely new cultural artifacts with previously unseen content, aesthetics, and styles. Of course, simply being novel, simply being new, doesn't automatically make something culturally or socially interesting or significant. Indeed, many definitions of creativity agree on this point. It is the creation of something which is both original and worthwhile or useful, right? So, it's very easy, right, to write a computer program, right, which will create endless new things, but which of these new things would be perceived as both original and worthwhile, actually advancing kind of culture as a whole, that's a different question. And from this point of view, right, it's kind of very, very kind of impossible to say at the moment to what extent generative AI is capable of culturally important innovation, because nobody is doing experiments, right? Nobody is testing it. So estimating what percentage of all novel artifacts produced by generative AI are also useful and not meaningful for larger culture is not a feasible project at the time. I mean, I'm not aware of any systematic effort to use AI systems to fill in, so to speak, a massive matrix, right, of all content and aesthetic possibilities by providing millions of specifically designed prompts, right? It would make sense to make this experiment to say, well, let's kind of create a kind of matrix, right? Let's create system, let's do this massive experiments and just try to create lots and lots of different things and then look at them and then maybe have some experts or have some other system evaluate them. But that's not what happens, right? In reality, we have millions of people who are kind of replicating certain forms of popular culture, anime, manga. There are always short films on YouTube, which are kind of pastiche or parody or simulation of some, let's say, kind of vintage aesthetics, right? So there's a few types of content which really dominate, and people say, well, yeah, it's not creative because that's what people are doing, right? But then nobody is doing this really systematic experiment and really kind of putting the system to the test to get at the larger part of this latent space inside these models to say everything which we can do, right? So it's likely that as in every other area of popular culture, only a small number of possibilities are realized over and over by millions of users, leaving a long tail of our possibilities unrealized. So if only a tiny fraction of vast universe of potential AI artifacts is being realized in practice, we can't make broad statements about the originality or utility of the rest of the universe. So this is one argument, right? But there's a second argument in this avatar presentation, which actually I think may be more interesting, and this is what I want to highlight. So it goes like this, right? So unlike traditional drawings, sculptures, paintings, right, and other types of human creations, generative media artifacts, right, are not created from scratch, right? I mean, you don't sit down and draw something. Instead, you typically give a system a prompt, and then the system creates images, video, music, maybe 3D models, and so on and so forth, right? So it's not creation from scratch. And also, these generative creations are not the result of capturing some sensory phenomena, such as photos, videos, and sound recordings. Instead, they emerge from a large archives, right, of already existing media artifacts. Okay? Right? So there's a huge data set, which in some cases are downloaded from the web. So in the case of a very popular open access model, Stable Diffusion, the data set is few billion images and text descriptions, which come from a web. Even maybe in the case of Adobe, it trained its own model, Firefly, using stock images, so maybe a few 100 million images, etc., etc. So we have these huge archives. And then, right, the system is trained to basically simulate, right, to be able to generate new images, new sounds, or new pieces of music, new text, right, new 3D models, and so on, with properties which are similar to the training data in this archive. So I want to highlight, right, this idea of, in a way, having some archive, right, having an accumulation of media from which things are generated. Because I think this generative mechanism links generative media to earlier art genres and processes, right? So thinking about this logic, right, of generating something from the archive, I think is very useful because it kind of allows us to place generative AI within the rich history of modern media. For example, we can compare it to film editing, right, which first appears around 1898, right? So first, you shoot film, now you shoot video, but for 120 years, people will shoot film, and then you edit the film, right? So you create a kind of database, you create an archive, you create a set of materials, and then you start creating a final product from this much larger collection of material, right? So maybe in the case of feature film, maybe shooting 10 times more material. In the case of documentary, maybe shooting 40, 50 times more material. So again, as I try to argue in my article, Databases in Symbolic Form from 98, which later became a chapter in Language of New Media, right? There are certain filmmakers which kind of focus on this operation and really create the aesthetics which thematizes this idea of database, where the film is a set of choices from database of material, but that's also, we can say, a kind of material and logical condition of cinema. Another example of, like, let's say, this kind of archival media, right? A media which is about kind of, let's say, editing and putting things together, which already exist, is composite photography, right? Which was already popular in the 19th century. We can also consider specific artworks which are especially relevant. For example, experimental collage films, such as a movie by Bruce Conner or 1958, or many Nem Pike installations, which feature bits of television programs playing across hundreds of TV monitors. Right? So I see many relevant moments and periods when I scan the history of art, visual culture, and media for our users with general procedure, right? For this general logic. And why this is, I think, an interesting and useful perspective. These earlier moments are relevant to understanding or to thinking about generative media, generative AI, not only because artists, filmmakers, photographers working in these times use this procedure, right? Kind of creating new artifacts out of accumulation. But more importantly, it's relevant because the reason for this use was consistent in all cases. In other words, once I started looking at kind of history of art and media from this particular perspective, I realized that it's possible to see a certain pattern in all this history. So this is, I think, to me now, right, looking back at my presentation, which I made in August, is maybe more productive and more interesting point. So let me kind of present this point. A new accumulation and accessibility of masses of cultural artifacts led artists to create new forms of art driven from these accumulations, right? Or to put it right, to paraphrase it, and again, I'm not so great with like history of art, going beyond 19th century. You can also, but so now like I will propose something, but please don't hold me to it because I'm not an expert in Renaissance or Baroque or let's say ancient Asian art or Islamic art and so on. But I think perhaps, right, it's also possible to say that we'll say the Italian Renaissance, which is of course very important to us historically. I mean, right, partly was also provoked by the kind of translations and large availability of ancient Greek texts, right, etc., etc. So maybe we can also find earlier this idea that with new kind of accumulation of artifacts or knowledge or new data, so to speak, and then the culture reacts by creating new forms of art out of this data, but this is maybe stretching it too far. So I will just kind of limit myself to the 20th and 21st century, where I feel more at home. So again, the idea is that I think if we look at the 19th, the 20th, and 21st century, in different moments, there's new kinds of accumulations of kind of media and later data, which emerge. Even artists, filmmakers, designers, photographers, writers, think about also kind of use of collage in writing. I mean, William Burroughs or etc. react to this accumulation by creating new types of aesthetics. Right? So now I will simply mention, right, a few of these examples. So in the 1990s and early 2000s, we have this phenomenon of so-called net art. And net artists, so people kind of creating art using what at that time was a completely new media or World Wide Web, right, which is a kind of hypertext and hypermedia. So you have web pages with links connecting to other pages, right? And the web was growing very dramatically after 1993, when the first graphic browser was introduced, and people felt as excited and threatened and fascinated as we feel in the last 2 years, right? Because of growth of generative AI. So around 96, 97, right, was artistic response to this new type of accumulation of content online, right? And also it's new type of accumulation, not only because of scale, because there are millions of websites and billions of websites and billions of blogs, and every museum has a website, etc., right? It did not exist 30 years ago, but it's also new accumulation because of its shape, right? Because all these pages are connected with hyperlinks, right? You can go from page to page. These pages are on different servers. So you have this kind of new type of museum without walls, and that was completely unprecedented, right? Now maybe young generation takes this for granted, but that was not the case 25 years ago. So there is a response. So, as it typically happens, new technology is created in America, and America becomes part of everyday life. Even people reacting like in other parts because we don't have it yet. So most net artists were from Europe. In fact, both Western and Eastern Europe, including some Russian participants because web was more slow. Anyway, so we can say that the net art was a reaction to this new type of accumulation, which is World Wide Web. Sorry, I didn't make, I didn't bring slides, but anyway, like if you look at them actually visually, it doesn't look so impressive today. So it's better if I just describe it. So one of his projects was Hugh Bunting, README, 1998. So it was a web page, which basically contained the text of an article about the artist. Even every word in this article was linked to existing web domain corresponding to that word, right? So every word was kind of hyperlinked. So he kind of pushed the logic of hyperlinking, by creating, one page where every word was hyperlinked somewhere. And then another project was Mark Napier, Shredder, also 98, which was kind of programmatic algorithmic montage, taking elements from different websites, kind of montaging it in real time, pieces of images, text, HTML code, the links. Now, if we go a bit earlier to 1970s and 1980s, we find another cultural paradigm, right? Another aesthetic response to an earlier form of accumulation of media, which is so-called, right? So-called, quote unquote, postmodernism. I mean, postmodern artists and designers frequently use bricolage and created works what's this? Okay. Consisting of quotations and references to art from the past, etc. Now, there are many possible explanations for the emergence of postmodern paradigm in the 80s and 90s, but one is very relevant to us. because the accumulation of the earlier art and media artifacts in structured and accessible collections, such as slide libraries, film archives, art history textbooks, with many photos of artworks in other formats, where different historical periods, movements, and creators were positioned together, inspired artists to begin creating bricollages from such references, as well as extensively quoting them. In other words, the idea is that with kind of modern media culture, by 1970s, 1980s, accumulates all these archives, right? So you can go to the slide library, in your university or art school library, and there are all the slides, right, of all these artworks. You can see them side by side. If you're going to film school, if you're studying film, we show you, right, all the different films, which are now available as, let's say, 60 millimeter or later on video. And, my colleague once told me that perhaps one of the reasons for the so-called, this kind of postmodern focus on quoting and bringing lots of references together is that simply this was, in a way, a first generation of artists which grew up with media archive, right? Which grew up with slide libraries, which grew up with film libraries, etc., etc. I mean, maybe it's a good explanation or not, I don't know, but it kind of fits my argument. So now we can say, what about if we go a bit early in time? So what about artistic modernism of 1910 and 1920s? Well, as I already pointed out, right, overall emphasis, we have ideology of modernism as reflected in numerous manifestos, published by different artistic movements, by different isms, was about originality and novelty, but what's in a way interesting and in a way almost paradoxical is that one of the procedures modern artists developed in search of its novelty was direct quotations from a vast universe of contemporary visual media that was rapidly expanding at the time, right? Because the early 20th century was another moment of this kind of media accumulation. So, for example, Vogue starts in 1910. I think, and then there's like new the American Times magazine starts in 23, right? So there's a kind of new generation of this very visually oriented magazines and publications. There's more photography in newspapers because of changes in printing. There's a cinema, right? And you have people doing like collage, right? And photomontage, right? So photomontage was one new type of aesthetic, one new type of art, where you basically don't, in a way, go, right, and take your own photographs. You don't go and make your own drawing, but you create artwork from what already exists, right? An example of media accumulation. And also, in my avatar presentation, I had one example of, I think, early work of Picasso. I forgot what year, like 1911 or 1912, where Picasso actually takes pieces of wallpaper or takes actually, so pieces of posters, pieces of objects, and can glues them to the canvas, right? So in response to visual intensification of mass culture in the early 1910s, George Braque and Pablo Picasso began incorporating actual newspaper, poster, wallpaper, and fabric fragments into their paintings. A few years later, John Hartfield, George Gross, Hannah Ha, Alexander Rodchenko, and a handful of other artists begin to develop photocollage technique. So photocollage becomes another method of creating new media artifacts from existing mass media images. So I want to add one more kind of historical point, right? One more example of how this kind of modern history, right, has all these moments of where new types of accumulation of content in media appear, and then we see in a few years later a kind of artistic, aesthetic response and new types of art, right, emerge response to this accumulation. So this is, again, I don't know, I will show like actually examples from my own artwork from 10 years ago, because I was also part of this movement, right? I was like, I'm not only participating in the current, let's say, kind of EI art movement with my artwork, exhibitions, book, blah, 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 but I actually also participated very actively in that earlier moment. And only like, recently I realized, okay, Lev, you can doing it again, right? So what was this earlier moment? Well, so the web, right, starts to grow in 93. And then in the late 90s, we see artists and designers who start doing data visualization, which is in taking like large data sets from the web and starting to kind of visualize them, but also treating visualization as artistic media, right? So by 2001, already like many award-winning digital artworks are in the genre of data visualization. So data visualization kind of peaks already around 2001, 2003. And then in 2002, I published my article about data visualization as a new subline, which I think was the first article about this new media. So that happens around 2002. And then by 2005, people actually start talking about, let's say, yet another iteration of this movement. We start talking about data art and data design, right? So there's so much data which is available now on the web, and this data kind of exists in a structured formats. So here's some data set of, maybe I don't know, car movements in New York, right? Or, tax, or like people taking a taxi in San Francisco, or, wherever data, right? So this is the new type of media, the new type of content, cultural content, and the new type of accumulation, which emerges in 2000, right? Not only like newspapers and visual magazines and photography like before, right? But now the data sets, right? The data sets, actually the world transformed, captured as the data becomes available, and all those data sets are kind of floating online. And then as a response, a number of people start creating work out of this data, and I'm watching it. And then I said, aha, maybe we can use this method as a kind of new method in humanities. And I come up with this idea, maybe some of you remember, some of cultural analytics, right? Which is using big data to study contemporary culture and also to study kind of historical visual culture, right? So I kind of took the idea, I was watching work with artists, and when I said, let me make it more systematic, let me create the tools to do it, and I will actually bring this idea to university, into the humanities. But of course, I was inspired by a few existing examples of artwork at the time. So what I want to do now is show you actually, is some of you know, and for some of you it will be maybe new, some examples, right, of these works me and my students and my collaborators were creating in my kind of cultural analytics lab between 2009 and 2015. And I think it's interesting to look at these works in connection to this yet another moment, right? Yet another moment, which is today, right? So what is the difference, right? And what is the similarity between this kind of data art, artistic visualization, and let's say cultural analytics moment of 10 years ago and the current moment of generative AI? Well, of course, there is difference in scale, right? So with data sets, which I used to train generative AI, are quite large, right? We didn't have data sets which would have billions of images. So in 2011 or 2009, I visualized 1 million pages from manga books. And for me, it was a huge data set. But of course, the more important difference is that with data art and my own cultural analytics, right, we're part of this attempt to make sense of a whole, right? So you have this accumulation, you have a data set, maybe it is the covers of the covers of Time magazine, or the pages from manga books, or maybe some data set of like taxi arrivals, and drop-offs in some city, and you're trying to visualize it as a whole, right? To create this kind of panoramic view and to see the patterns, right? And then, so that's kind of what you do, right? I'll show examples in a second. Whereas with generative AI, you do something else, right? You take this huge data set, and then you kind of train the neural network, which, after endless iterations, learns automatically the patterns in this data set. And then it basically learns how to generate new artifacts, which are similar to what's already in the data set. Right? And before I can go into these examples, I just want to say that I think it's a useful perspective, obviously not the only one, but I think it's a useful perspective to think about the kind of history of these periodic moments of new types of accumulation of media and content, photographs, slides in our history library, film collections, museum about walls, right? So Andrea Malraux, when he writes his books in the late 40s, and he says, well, the history book with hundreds of reproductions is a virtual museum, is a museum about walls. He's simply reacting to what already exists, right? So that was another type of reaction. And why is it useful? Because I think that this phenomenon, right, that we accumulated huge amounts of cultural content online, right, and we conduct our culture online, right? So generative AI is revolutionary, right? It's used by, hundreds of millions of people. I mean, I checked this summer, ChatGPT site has like 500 million users, right, per day, and you can use it to translate things, to write code. I use Claude AI to help me edit my, not to write, but to help me edit my book this summer. But I think it's not the end, right? It's not the last thing which will come out from this massive accumulation of content which we create online, right? The internet, social media, et cetera, right? There are billions of images being created every day. So we'll see other things. So let me show you some examples of this work. Again, some of you know it. And I have one example, like in my background. But for many of you, it's going to be new. Okay, let's see, we can go here. Yeah, we can go here. Okay, so here we are. So I'm using Flickr. So Flickr was the first popular, anyway, it's also interesting. It's also part of our story because maybe not everybody knows Flickr, but Flickr was the first kind of popular online social media network, right, for photography. It was like, I think 2004, if I remember correctly. Flickr was also historically important because they introduced the idea of tags, right? People can tag their collection. And that was before, Instagram, which came 2010. So I'll show you some examples. So this is from an exhibition which I had at, already in the fall of 2010, which was at the University of California, San Diego, where I was teaching, where I had my lab, and it kind of presents some examples of this work. So once you can figure out what to do, it was just me and one postdoc, and then sometimes, hire some undergraduate students. So we did lots of things very quickly. In fact, if we go to, so I still have my lab website, even though I haven't really done anything in the last few years. So this is, this cultural analytics lab, which was this effort, right, to do all the stuff and to bring this method of visualizing accumulations of images of different genres to kind of make it into the method, right, in humanities. And I think it was important at the time because at that time, digital humanities was only focusing on text. And also people in digital humanities had no idea about art and design. So we kind of brought our expertise in art and design. And maybe not everybody knows, but 90% of all these visualizations was actually done by me because I was actually the only person with like art background in our lab. So there are lots of projects here, et cetera, et cetera. But let me actually show you sort of the some results. So this is like, so again, you don't see details. So I wrote a software which would read images from a directory, right, or directories on a hard drive, even create small thumbnails with images, and then place it on a canvas. So my original was 40,000 by 40,000 pixels. And this is, of course, a small version. And what is the data set here, which is being visualized? Well, it's actually 1 million pages from manga publications, right? So it's a kind of a nice slice, right? A nice sample of global manga culture. And we can zoom in a little bit. And again, you don't see lots of detail, but if you want, you can actually go here and you can kind of download within at a larger size, and you'll see more detail. But the idea is that we used kind of also in early form, right, an early type of AI or AI application, which is computer vision. So the computer analyzed all these images and measured a number of visual characteristics, and then the images were positioned, right, in a particular order by the software which I wrote, which again, I don't want to go into it because I want to have enough time for questions. If you're mathematically minded, the y-axis is the entropy, and the x-axis is variability. So basically what it means is that the pages which have more detail, more texture, and so on, appear on the top, and the pages which are more schematic, more poster-like appear at the bottom, and you see this kind of very slow progression, right, from top to bottom. And right, I was very interested in particular shape, right? Why this 1 million pages kind of form the shape, and then you don't quite see it here because the pages overlap. But if you visualize the same data as points, you'll see that there is much more density in the center and there's less density here. So then you can say why this kind of manga culture, why manga artists are privileging particular static parameters, right? Particular static styles, this kind of stuff, and why you don't have so much stuff here. And you can also use it as a kind of almost educational diagnostic tool. So imagine you're teaching like a class in manga, and you have a young student who says, here's my manga, and it's like, I think it's genius. I have this really original kind of style, and you can take her or his images and kind of project them, add them into the space, and then say, no, you're not original because you actually turn out to be right in the center. Of course, as I also theorized in my articles and in the book, Cultural Analytics, published in 2020 by MIT Press, my previous book, these visualizations, right, they both reveal and conceal because there are lots of different aspects to the style in literature, in music, cinema, music video, fashion. So what you're doing is you kind of, in a way, only looking at this collection from a point of view of two particular dimensions, but at the same time, this limitation is also very useful because it allows you to kind of formally see the relationship, the density, the patterns, right? And I would say this is not the latent space because we're using only two features, right? Two variables. But in our visualizations, we're actually combining multiple variables to visualize this space of visual style, which is actually the same fundamental technique which is also used in generative AI. Right? So that was one example. And another example, let's say, would be this one. So this is a bit easier to read. So what it is, this is all the covers of Time magazine So I don't know if Time is still published. I'm not sure, but it was a very important, right, American, very visual news magazine, first published in 1923. And again, right, so in 2009, like my postdoc in the lab said, Lev, look, with Time, they put all these covers on their website. I said, can you grab them? And then like, right, and then like, 2 days later, we made this visualization. So it was very, very literally, right, an example of this kind of larger process I'm talking about, how we have availability of new type of accumulation, of new type of collections of content and data, like allowed people, such as in this case, our lab, to create something and to look at it in a new way. So the idea is that, again, we can zoom in more, right? The whole thing is like also, I think, like 20,000 pixels. So if I zoom in, you can see individual covers, but you can make them out. So we basically positioned all the covers, right? Left to right, top to bottom. And then there are different patterns you can see here. There are certain pattern in content, which you can see. There are changing patterns in color, in saturation. I mean, I can spend like 15 minutes discussing it. And what was really interesting to me at the time was to see that when I was very gradually changing kind of visual patterns, but we don't see these abrupt changes, right? Because somebody said, well, maybe you should project onto this visualization the moments, when particular, art directors, the new art director came into a magazine. I said we can do it, but I think what's interesting is some of these patterns change very gradually over the course of 15, 20, or 70 years. So in a way, we're looking at this kind of gestalts being visualized. And then another way to look at the same, right, at the same data is this visualization, almost like a different view, right? Almost like imagine you have a kind of historical process, right? A cultural artifact as this kind of body, and you have taking X-rays of this body from different perspectives. So this is the same data. The X-axis corresponds to time. So 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And then vertically, again, we used a very simple measure. We measured saturation, which is how colorful each cover is. And then we position each cover on this vertical axis in relation to this axis. And again, if you zoom in, if you go in, you can download and you can actually see the details, and you can start seeing very interesting things. Like, for example, in the 60s, there's more variability, right, between the, let's say, least saturated covers and more saturated covers, right? So this range is larger. Even in the 70s, the range gets smaller. So you start noticing these very, very interesting things, right? Just maybe show a couple of more. There's a lot. Like these ones. So this is another type of media and data accumulation, which we created. So some people in my lab, my graduate students, very much into video games, right? In fact, one of them became a professor of game studies in the best program in UK. So, so by playing these games, and it takes, like single player games, and it takes maybe 20, 40, 100 hours to finish a game, I said, maybe we can visualize like this process of gameplay. So we wrote a kind of software, which was, as he was playing the game in his game console, right? It was grabbing what was on the screen, I don't know, like once every second or a few frames per second. And then, again, this is like 2010. The computers were much slower. The memory was much slower. We spent like lots of time to create this visualization. So I think there are two of them. So you can see what this one is. Yeah, so it was like Kingdom Hearts 1 and Kingdom Hearts 2, which was very popular kind of game by Japanese studio. And this one is represents, I think, 22,000 frames, right? So it's basically, so he played the game 62 hours, right? 62 hours of gameplay in 29 sessions. And then, the software was running on, I don't know, I don't remember if it was a PC or a game station. So it's capturing all this video, and then we can sample this video. So then we generated this archive, right? Of this kind of gameplay, this interactive digital process, going through a game, etc., etc. And then we simply organize them in a grid in order of gameplay, left to right, top to bottom. And because he knew about the games, right? He was doing work in game studies. He identified all kinds of patterns here, like as you go from one world into a different world and so on and so forth, right? So here is, let's say, new type, right, of cultural experience, which is interactive digital process. Notice that digital humanities completely ignores, right, these processes. We're obsessed with like analyzing patterns in literary text, right, etc. But today our culture is digital, so we should be actually doing more of that stuff. So it was one, and then I think was the second one. I think maybe this one is like maybe 40 hours versus 60 hours. So and then this is different visualization of the same thing, etc., etc. Maybe I just show a couple of more is when I want to kind of start closing up so we have time for questions. Let's see. I want to show you just a moment. Let's see. Maybe we'll go here. Collection. Maybe we'll go to, for example, okay, let's go to paintings. And so what I want to say is that we also like applied this method. We also applied this method to digitize historical culture, right? Because 90s and especially 2000 was also this period where yet another type of accumulations, right, are becoming available, which is digitized paintings, books, audio records. Like museums started digitizing their collections. That was all kind of happening in the late 2000s. Again, around 2010, with my undergraduate students, we spent like a semester and we created a data set, like using different sources online, of most comprehensive, we were able to do it with time, with of like paintings by impressionist artists, right? So artists which were participating in I think it was 13, right, impressionist exhibitions in the 1870s and 1880s. So it's estimated that they painted around 13,000 paintings and pastels, but turns out many of them there are no photographic reproductions left. So we're able to find around 6,000. And then we can apply the same method, right, where you use computer vision to measure, in this case, I think 200, we wrote the system. So we measure 200 properties of his paintings, texture and composition and colors, etc., etc. And then using a technique, which, as I said, it's also kind of a fundamental idea, also important. It's key to AI, which is related in space, and visualized it according to all these parameters. So basically, the computer tries to visualize this painting oops, sorry, what happened here? Disappeared. Sorry. Okay. It's in such a way that the paintings which are similar in visual form appear next to each other. Again, this is not perfect, but you can get the idea. And it so happens that, let's say, in Impressionist art, there's a kind of certain correlation, right, between visual form and the content. So, for example, lots of these kind of landscapes of maybe like scenes outside of Paris, boating, etc. May have like a kind of a horizon line. So then these images would be like in one place. Even portraits will have a different composition. Like there is no content information explicitly, right? In this, in our data, the images are simply grouped, right, by visual characteristics, but it so happens that there's this correspondence, so you get some of this content mapping as well. And what's interesting here is that when you think about impressionism, right, you're thinking about this very light paintings, full of color, outdoor scene, but it turns out that they only occupy maybe about 30% of the whole production, right? And in fact, lots of our paintings created by these artists, maybe when we're younger, or maybe when they're older, or in different periods, in a way is more traditional, right? More brown, right? More, let's say, less colorful, darker. And that was another very key idea for me, right? Is to look at manga, or look, for example, at all of Instagram, or look at impressionism movement, not only focusing on masterpieces, right? Not only focusing on few things which are important, which for us become representative of this whole phenomena. Like, for example, in 2013, all the journalists were thinking that Instagram was only about selfies, because the selfies were kind of more visible. And then we started creating these projects, right? And I'll show one in a second, maybe the last thing I do, where we downloaded over a couple of years 16 million, 70 million Instagram photos from 16 cities, and we found there was all our other subjects which are on Instagram, right? But you can also apply this idea historically. So the idea was to look at the cultural phenomena, cultural movement, artistic movement, as comprehensively as possible, ideally visualizing everything to get like a different look, right? And it turns out that Impressionism, if you look at it as a whole, right, as opposed to focusing on the masterpieces, it kind of has a different aesthetic as opposed to what you think. So I'll just show this last thing about Instagram, and then I think we'll start. So let's see. Okay, so for example, again, very, very simple, right? So in 2012, I was approached by a very talented young postdoc. So we started, he said, let's work on visualizing Instagram data. So Instagram at that time had a way for kind of researchers, actually for anybody, go and download this data. Later with social media networks, after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, we closed this off after 2016. But it was this period where all this data was available, which basically led to few different disciplines emerging, right? So my cultural analytics was one of them, but of course, more importantly, it was also emergence of computational social science in the late 2000s, because people said, oh my God, there's all this data about human society available, on Twitter or our networks, right? So this is simply, I think, like 50,000 Instagram images shared over the course of a few days in different cities. So Tokyo, Bangkok, Sao Paulo, Moscow, Berlin, etc. Right? So again, very, very simple visualization. So it was a way at the time to go to Instagram sort of API and to say, okay, I want to grab all the images being shared in a 5x5 square around particular location. So we selected the locations which correspond to the kind of centers of the cities, and then simply we kind of grabbing images and said, let's grab, up to 50,000 images which are being shared, and these 50,000 images would turn out to correspond to a few days, and you can see these waves, right? So the lighter bands correspond to the days, and the darker bands correspond to nights. But of course, the nights were not completely dark, because you can also already at this time have the ability to maybe share images which are not immediately being captured, but all the images from your phone. And then, every city, right? Every city has its own kind of pattern, right? So it's like, I thought this interesting way to think about the city and the city life and the kind of city pattern as the accumulation of these snapshots, right? So it's like a documentary, right, created by multiple citizens and also visitors, right? Because lots of these Instagrams are taken, of course, by visitors to the city, and then kind of capture this kind of pattern. And every city has a different pattern, right? So Bangkok is in more uniform, even Tokyo, New York, with bands are more pronounced. And also, if people are sharing more images, and with 50,000 images will be 4 days, and if we're sharing less images, it will become 6 days, etc. So this is one view. And then just show one more thing. Just a second. Here. I was looking at this today, I'm like, oh my God, Lev, it's amazing how much stuff I did. It was like 1,500 visualizations from this Flickr, and it's only a small portion of what, it was all like 2 years of like very intense activity. Okay, let me just see. Okay, here it is. Even just show you a few more. So this is the same also cities, but this is like visualized using a different technique. So I wrote a code like called radial visualization. So one parameter which we measure determines the distance of images to the center, and the second parameter determines the angle. So in this case, I think the average hue, the average color determines the angle, and the average brightness, right, determines how close the image is to the center, right? And then we can see kind of, again, each city having its own kind of footprint, right? Visual footprint. So San Francisco, New York City, Tokyo, etc., etc. And then this was Tel Aviv. And this is like 1 week, the life of Tel Aviv. And you can see how people sharing more images during the day, and they can share less images, right, at night. So there's this natural kind of process, right, or like more. So each of the slices corresponds to 1 day. And then this was very important, right? I wouldn't say celebration because it's actually more like a mourning, right? But anniversary in Israel. So we have I forgot exactly. I forgot. Sorry, I've done this 10 years ago, so we can look it up. But yeah, very important. Days, work stops. People go outside with fireworks, and you can see that the special days reflected in these different patterns kind of here. And then the other days are very similar, but also every day is a bit unique, right? So to summarize, I mean, I can go on and on and on, but I think I want to. I'm actually surprised I lasted so long. I thought I was going to be dead after 40 minutes. So I was going to do a third part, but I guess the third part will happen another time. So the third part was to show you examples of my more recent work I've been doing in the last 2 years, right, which is using kind of generative AI, which, as I said, of course, there are lots of different ways to look at generative AI. You can place it within history of artificial intelligence, etc., history of automation, etc., democracy, etc., etc. But in this particular presentation, I wanted to invite you to think with me yet in a different way, to think about generative AI as revolutionary new technology, but at the same time as something which is kind of revolutionary as it is, it's also something very historical, because, as I said, it's a new technology, and it's a new way to make content out of accumulation, right, of all the existing content, right? So by kind of placing it within history, we can start seeing, I think, historical affinity to, let's say, data art and artistic visualization and cultural analytics from 15, 10 years ago, net art of the 1990s, postmodern art of the 80s, photo collage and photo montage of 1920s, etc., right? And as I said, it's definitely not the last thing which we'll see. And the last thing I want to say, and then let's open for questions. The development of the web, right, over the last 30 years has been, of course, unprecedented. And one of its many, many effects is a certain fragmentation, right, of discourse. So before we had magazines, right? You read film magazines, you read some, literary magazine, you go to cafe, right? So here we have Zoom. We brought together by this technology. We may be all in different countries, but how much we share, we have different backgrounds, and because of it, like, can we have like a very deep conversation? Well, maybe yes, maybe no, because we all kind of been fragmented, right? We're all reading different things, we're all looking at different references. So some of my colleagues, teaching art students complain that today, again, maybe at Bazaar, your students are much better. But in New York, people complaining who teach in School of Visual Arts or Parsons that, with students we don't know, like, right? We don't have a sense of canon. Maybe we heard of Picasso, but we don't know about Matisse, with like painting students, because we're looking at some like their own Instagram references, right? We follow our own things. So there's this kind of huge fragmentation which happened. Maybe it's good or bad. That's a whole other discussion. I don't want to go there. But I think one of the things which we, in a way, maybe failed to create as a culture and society is a kind of to compensate, right, or counteract with new forms of like accumulation, right? So there's always content accumulated online in billions of servers, this library, that library. But how do we bring it together, right? How do we kind of find commonalities? How do we synthesize it? Well, so Wikipedia was one absolutely amazing, unprecedented project, right? To build on a web technology and to create a kind of form of synthesis where multiple people can write the same article. And nothing as amazing was created after Wikipedia, and Wikipedia was 2002, right? So maybe to me, it was like the last great project created on top of the web. And then, Europeana, right? Maybe some you know about Europeana, right? So it's this project with like lots of funding, et cetera, some ideas to bring all this content from hundreds of European museums and libraries. How many people use Europeana, right? I don't know. So in a way, so we have, right, this huge accumulation of content, conversations, discourses, but our tools to access it, to kind of make sense of it, to find point of commonalities, I think are very inferior, right? We have search engine, so you search for something, and when it gives you, like, here's like I found 1 billion pages, but it basically says here's all the separate pages, but the content is not summarized, the content is not brought together, the content is not synthesized. So from this point of view, I just want to say, for me, maybe the most interesting and maybe historically the most important function of generative AI, right, is not my ability to create the new content. Because after all, like, do I need AI to create new images? No, maybe I can draw new images, right? Yeah, it's great. If you don't know how to draw, maybe you want to show to your friend, like, this is the house I want to live, but yeah, of course it speeds things up, but ultimately, you can't really control it very much, right? You don't quite know what you're going to get. It's a kind of game. So if I have money, I would maybe go to a professional architect and have him or her make professional rendering, right? If I have money, I would hire a professional film studio to edit my film, not to spend time with like clean AI or Luma or whatever. But so this ability to generate new stuff is very interesting. But ultimately, we humans, we already know how to generate stuff for thousands of years, right? We already had cave painting 100,000 years ago. But I think maybe to me, again, what's more interesting and maybe historically more important, if we can use some technologies, which for now we call AI, tomorrow we'll call something else, to summarize, to aggregate, okay, to find commonalities in all this content which already exists. So from that point of view, I don't know if you're using, but if you're not, I highly recommend you try. It's free. I don't know what's available in other countries, right? Because the companies don't make available everything in other countries for different reasons. It's a tool called Perplexity, right? Perplexity AI, which is like the next thing after the search engine. I think ChatGPT now also recently, right, in the last, I think, few days or a week, introduced the ability to access the web. So you basically ask a question, as opposed to simply getting here's a million web pages, it basically synthesizes and generates an answer, and then there are these kind of footnotes, and then you can go check, right, particular web pages. So I think this ability to aggregate the existing content, right, And this aggregation function is maybe historically very, very, very important. And ultimately, maybe it's more kind of revolutionary, or maybe again, historically more consequential than simply the ability to have AI write like a piece of music or make images, etc., etc. But we'll see, right? We've only been 2 years into this. So think about the web, think about how the web changed culture. So think of, so basically we're maybe now in 1995, so maybe we haven't seen anything yet. Anyway, I should finish. Somehow you guys gave me all this energy. It's 3:35 a.m., but I'm probably tomorrow I'll wake up with an awful headache and I will hate you all, especially organizers. But for now, I love you, and I hope we can have some discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was really insightful and rich presentation. And thank you for all energy that you gave us. Thank you so much. And also I wanted to highlight with this generous approach of sharing all these impressive documents through open access, contributing to really democratizing the knowledge, which and making it widely accessible, which is really one of the problematics of our project. Huge thank to Lev Manovich to give us all of this generous partage. I'm sorry.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.